Eden Project community. I'm also being joined today by my colleague Sian, who's joining us from Cornwall. Give us a wave, Sian. Sian is here to help make sure everything runs smoothly, so she is absolutely invaluable. And without much further ado, I want to introduce you to our main speakers. Obviously, the theme of the session today is kindness during COVID, so I'm very, very pleased to be able to welcome Ben Thurman from Carnegie UK Trust. So Carnegie's role basically is to look at actually how we can increase well-being in the UK, and particularly they work with decision makers and people who make policy. And so they've been working on kindness at quite a strategic level for quite a long time, looking at actually what helps us to be kind, what can stop us from being kind, and what we can do basically to make us a kinder society, which obviously feels so relevant now in this crisis that we find ourselves in. So I'm going to hand over to Ben, who's going to tell us a little bit about actually what they've learned about kindness and what helps us to be kind. After that, we're going to come back together. We're going to break out into small groups to actually have a little bit of a discussion about some of those ideas. Then we'll come back into the main group. We'll feed back. We'll do a little bit of Q&A. So if you have any questions that come up for you during the session, just pop them in the chat, flag it as a question, and we will make sure that we try and answer it at the end of the session. And without further ado, I think I will hand over to Ben.
Thanks very much, Sophie. Hope everybody can hear me all right. And just, yeah, thanks for that introduction and for inviting me along today, to you and everyone at Eden Project Communities, and especially for everyone for coming along to take part in this conversation today. It's fantastic to see so many people here, and yeah, I don't know about everybody else, but it certainly feels to me like we need something positive to focus our energy on today. And so I'm really looking forward to the conversation with you all. I'm just going to try and share my screen with you so you don't have to stare at me for the next 15 minutes or so, which is, there we go. I think that should be working. Always a little bit nervous around the technology. So yeah, so I've been working on, I work at the Carnegie UK Trust. We've been thinking about kindness for almost 5 years as an organisation. So I'm aware that I'm definitely biased, but it certainly feels to me that kindness is something that's particularly important right now. Over the past 6 months or so, we've heard, all sorts of stories of people connecting in new ways, offering help and support to each other. Seen organisations working in partnership with communities, and even heard journalists and politicians using the language of kindness, which is something really new to me. And just last night heard Nicola Sturgeon asking us to be strong, be kind, to act out of love and solidarity, and just quite amazing to see that sort of language from our elected leaders. And so I just wanted today to share a bit of the work that we've been doing on kindness over the last few years, and I suppose really to use this to think about what, if anything, has changed since the pandemic hit. And if things have changed, what can we do to sustain some of the positives from this shared experience? But when I was thinking about this just earlier in the week, it felt like it was quite important to just start by asking the question, are we actually seeing more kindness in Scotland and in general? And I was thinking about this because last week three reports came out, and I've shared some of the sort of key figures and statements from these, and I'm just going to sort of go through them. So at the top there, you've got 61%, or 3 in 5 of us, saying that they felt care and support of others during this crisis. And this is from a bit of research done by More in Common. They surveyed over 2,000 people in a representative sample of the UK. And worth noting that this figure, 61%, is much higher than any of the polling that they did, asking the same questions in the Netherlands, in France, in Germany, Italy, and the US as well. And then underneath that, another one, I think last Friday, from Reset UK, and they talked about a Britain that, in spite of people's different experiences, has been reshaped by the pandemic and is kinder and more united. And again, I think this bit of research should engage with thousands of people. So there's a real sense from these two bits of work here that people have experienced and acted in kindness, and across all different backgrounds, that this is something people identify as something that they want to carry on beyond the pandemic. But then the sort of two bullet points a bit lower down, one of which is from the Say More in Common survey, we see that, you know, well, about 1 in 3 of us think that trust in other people has worsened, and they sort of go on to say that a major part of this is our perceptions of whether or not other people are following the rules of lockdown. And then the last one, which I found really quite worrying, was from Demos on the types of feelings that this evokes. And, you know, they talked about hatred and resentment, and found that, you know, people's perceptions of others during lockdown was more divisive than Brexit, which is probably, well, up until COVID, was probably the most divisive thing we'd all experienced. So it feels like kindness during COVID is maybe a bit of a mixed picture, and perhaps that some people feel closer to those around us in our communities and our neighbourhoods.
Just interrupting you. Is your mic on your headphones?
It is, yeah. Are you struggling to hear me a bit?
It's a little bit scratchy for people. I don't know if you hold it or if you just speak into your computer.
How's this?
That's better.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's good.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yes, I'll try and keep this by my mouth. It just, yeah. So I think perhaps a bit of a mixed picture, a sense that we feel closer to those around us in our sort of physical places, but maybe less connected to those who are outside of this sort of network of relationships. And that felt quite important to us because of the way that we talk about and frame kindness at Carnegie. So yeah, thanks to Sophie for sort of getting the organisation. We've been around for just over 100 years with a mission to improve the lives and well-being of people in the UK and Ireland. And about 4 years ago, we started thinking about relationships, everyday relationships, and looking at the importance of social connection with people around us, and how this impacts our sense of well-being and belonging at an individual, community, and societal level. And there's a whole raft of evidence about the importance of relationships, which I'm sure people are sort of slightly familiar with. And we found that kindness was quite a useful way to talk about this, because it's something that everyone understands and that everyone experiences and feels. And you know, we've seen this particularly during COVID, that sort of the way that kindness engages people across the political spectrum as well. But what we started to see was that kindness, people engage with kindness at sort of different levels, and I've put the sort of 3 levels that we've identified on the slide here, and I'm just going to quickly talk through them. So the first one is the random acts of kindness, the things that are quite nice and easy to do, often popular on social media, like smiling at strangers, leaving motivational messages for people to find, giving money to charity. All of these things that are really positive, but because they're quite often anonymous, don't always engage with the reality of people's lives. Sometimes the value is more to me as a giver than the person who is receiving this random act of kindness. So we, in our work at the Trust, have been more interested in what we called relational kindness. And I think it's this that people have really seen and talked about during the COVID crisis. Things like, you know, do you help your neighbours? Do you notice when someone might need a little help more than usual? Do you go out of your own way to do things for other people when you have the option of just walking past and doing nothing? And I think the other important thing to note is that this quite often feels risky because you know, when we reach out to someone instinctively, we don't always know what the response is going to be, and it might be difficult, it might feel awkward, we might get in over our head. So it's not, kindness isn't always an easy thing to do. And I think partly because of this element of risk, we found that we only tend to be kind and relationally kind to people who are like us. We're less good at supporting people who are different. And so that last category there, the big circle, is radical kindness. And that asks us to be kind indiscriminately, so to reach across boundaries, even when it feels difficult to do so. And I suppose at its heart, it asks, how does kindness become a shared value that connects us across differences of age and race and class and so on? And that feels particularly important right now when we go back to thinking about some of the divisions that we talked about on the previous slide. And so that's the way we sort of framed kindness, trying to move towards that relational and radical kindness in the way that we build society. And we've done a bit of research on what it takes to create the conditions for kindness, and we're quite clear about talking about creating the conditions for kindness because from our sort of perspective, you can't tell people to be kind or to do kindness, and you can't force it into being. And if you try to do that, it becomes something different entirely, a duty or an obligation. So we think it's more about creating environments where people feel able to make those instinctive and human connections with each other. And we did a bit of work with communities looking at, you know, what are the conditions that enable us to do this. And there's sort of three themes up on the slide here. And the first one was we found that places and spaces are really important, and that's maybe quite a difficult thing to talk about at the moment when we've also had further restrictions put on us in terms of the COVID measures. We found in this work that, you know, places that are welcoming, that are gender-free, where people feel comfortable just being themselves and they don't have a particular reason to be there, enable kindness. And yeah, I think, you know, so much of our physical space has been taken away from us over the last 6 months and has changed, and that's been incredibly hard for everybody. But we've also created new spaces in certain situations. We've some of them digital, like the space that we're sharing today, even though it can feel harder to connect than if we were in a room together. Some things like the sort of street level WhatsApp groups and Facebook pages. And we've also seen people starting to use neighborhood spaces in different ways as well, with sort of messages in windows, with you know, people writing chalk on pavements. And I suppose especially at the start of lockdown, what I felt really closely was the way that people were spending more time in their neighborhood spaces, particularly when there was less traffic on the roads, and using this as a sort of space to bump into each other, and just to not physically bump into each other, obviously, but just to kind of, you know, meet other people and check in with how they were. And that kind of sense of bumping into each other from a safe physical distance is quite important, because one of the other themes of our research into, you know, what it takes to create the conditions for kindness was what we called informal opportunities. We found that kindness sort of depends really on opportunities and permission to act. And it requires us to have these spaces where we bump into each other, whether that's, you know, dropping our kids off at school and chatting to parents there, whether it's the, you know, conversations that we have with our neighbours in stairwells or over garden fences. It's in these sorts of spaces that kindness can become possible. And I think, you know, one sort of really strong example that came from a bit of work that the Eden Project communities had led as part of our Kindness Innovation Network was around food. They talked about, I mean, sharing food and shared eating is obviously a sort of big part of Eden Project's approach to building community. But they found that food can act as a vehicle for kindness and create an opportunity for things to happen that otherwise might not. And yeah, I suppose while we're not going to be sitting down and sharing a meal together for a little while now, we've still seen this kind of thing expressed in other ways, with communities delivering soup and sandwiches over lunchtime to each other, with people doing neighbours shopping. And it's about more than food. It's about the relationships that we have and the social connection that we have to those other people. So I suppose when I was sort of reflecting on this sense of opportunities, what we've seen is that, while we don't have so many places and activities and opportunities to connect with each other, we have got this sort of new sense of a permission to act in kindness. And because we're all going through this shared experience, there's a feeling that we're allowed to reach out to neighbours to just check in if they're doing okay, whether they need any help, whether they need any support, in a way that previously might have felt difficult or uncomfortable, or maybe we just didn't have feel like we had the time to do that. And I suppose, I did really want to stress that we are all living through something that's having a colossal social and emotional impact on everybody, and that it's not shared evenly and it's affecting some people more than others. So none of this sort of discussion about kindness is suggesting otherwise. But it does feel like there's something quite important about the values that we recognise that are important to us right now and the stories that we tell. And that sort of leads on to the final theme there at the bottom of the slide, which is on values of kindness. And yeah, very, very simply in our research, we found that the more we notice, the more we question our own behaviours, the more we talk about kindness, that this has an impact on our own behaviours and interactions with each other, and that then creates a ripple effect. We found that creating opportunities to recognise and celebrate kindness in our communities, in our workplaces, in the media, which obviously has a sort of strong influence on the way that we think and feel about other people. Creating these sorts of opportunities to talk about kindness helps to build a shared narrative, and that encourages all of us to act in a different way, to make time and space for those everyday relationships. And so I think going back to the start, to that Reset UK report that I mentioned at the beginning, if we do want to emerge from COVID as a kinder society, and all the evidence from surveying people suggests that is something that people want, then these are the stories that we need to tell about kindness and connection. So it's not about what other people in other communities are doing, which only breeds sort of division and a sense of disconnection with other people. It's stories about that focus on what we all share and what we can all achieve when our lives and work are underpinned by kindness. And so I'm going to hand back to Sophie just now, and I think we're then going to go into sort of smaller breakout discussions just to have a little bit of a think about this topic. But before I finish, I just wanted to sort of end with a couple of thoughts or questions about what you have noticed. What has changed in your communities and your working lives to enable or perhaps inhibit kindness in certain situations? And what do you think we could do to sustain some of the positive changes that have happened in the context of our relationships and connection with the people around us? And really looking forward to hearing back from those discussions and getting a sense of what you've noticed and having a discussion later on. Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ben. Obviously, if you have any questions that you want to ask Ben off the back of that, please do pop them in the chat and we'll come back to them at the end of the session. Thank you for talking us through that. I'm genuinely fascinated by the research that Carnegie has done into this, because I think, as you said at the beginning, kindness is something that is part of everyone's lives, and I think it's often just easy to assume that actually it is a very easy and instinctive thing to do, and it's very interesting to kind of break it down and go, well, actually What are the things that we need to be kind? We need opportunities. We need permission to behave in a certain way, knowing that we're not going to be rebuffed or judged. I remember the first time I came across this, and there was that concept of the concept of a welcoming space, and being how that actually sets itself up as a place where you can experience kindness and give kindness. And I could remember places where I had been welcomed in warmly, genuinely, with no agenda from the people that were welcoming there, and just to be accepted in that space. And actually, that is both incredibly powerful, easy, but also requires thought. Anyone, I think, can do that, but it just requires the awareness to go, that's something I can do in a really straightforward way. So I'm really grateful to you for talking us through that. What we're going to do now is we're going to pop you into some smaller groups to hear what you think about those ideas, and also hear what you think about actually how you've seen how you've seen kindness kind of over the last 6 months during COVID, and look at those questions that Ben has kind of posed to us there. Sean has also put those questions in the chat as well. So what has changed to enable or inhibit kindness? I don't know about you, but I think I've seen some changes in actually what was going on right at the start of lockdown, when actually I think there were a lot of things going on, to, say the last couple of weeks where actually it feels like quite a different atmosphere, and I've seen different things to kind of enable and inhibit kindness. But also actually what do we do to sustain the positives? If we've seen outpourings of kindness earlier or now, what do we do to really hold on to those? So we're going to pop you into some discussion groups for about 20 minutes to allow you to kind of get your teeth into that a little bit. Remember that the breakout rooms are recorded, so please feel free to put your videos on and just discuss freely. And we will bring you back after about 20 minutes. If you don't want to join a breakout room, you will basically receive a little notification saying basically that you're being invited to join the room. If you'd rather not take part in the discussion, I have not seen this before, but it looks absolutely fascinating. The project to look at the changes that have happened around us and try and find a way forward. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I can just say briefly that I'm an artist, and I'm one of 10 artists working on a project in Dumfries and Galloway in Scotland. So this is trying to capture some of the things that have happened during the pandemic around kind of care and kindness. And there's 10 artists each taking a research area and talking to people around the things that have happened, trying to capture them and to find a kind of creative way of holding those in the public conversation so that we don't lose some of that as things maybe change, hopefully, and restrictions are lifted in the future, but trying to capture some of the learning and and being able to kind of share that and keeping that as a kind of live ongoing project. So I've just put that in the chat box if anyone wants to check in with that, and it would be brilliant if similar projects could be seeded elsewhere as well.
Brilliant, thank you.
Do you want to go through the different rooms? I think Lisa has a view of the rooms. So if we maybe go through each room and somebody who's brave can share from each room.
We believe in you guys.
And then we can sort of maybe address the first question and then go on to the next question and just go around the rooms. I think that's a bit easier than people electing to be the volunteer and the guinea pig, maybe.
Let's do that. So who was in breakout room 1? Lisa, can you remind us who was in breakout room 1? Oh, Karen was in breakout room 1, and Maggie.
Yep,
Karen?
so we've got Kat, Chris, Karen and Maggie.
Go for it, Karen.
We covered quite a lot of different things. I'm not sure we 100% stuck to the questions, but I think it was good to follow the train of thought. We started talking about an example of kindness being given over an extended period of time through the lockdown, and the way that made the person who was the recipient feel, and the discomfort that sort of kind of created. and then we talked a little bit about how, you know, psychological contracts and people who are where you have a transactional relationship, or where you have a more sort of relational sort of relationship, where you expect maybe in a workplace to be giving and taking equally, and how kindness doesn't sort of fit in that way, and maybe we're not used to that sort of experience and that kind of relationship. So that's something of what we talked about. We talked a bit about leaders modeling kindness and valuing kindness, and how if we're being asked to sort of snitch on our neighbours because there's 8 of them in the garden or something, that doesn't quite sit with encouraging kindness and community and volunteering. And so there's sort of mixed messages. And then we talked about examples of strong leaders who just were very naturally talking in terms of kindness and comfort, and ways that you achieve real lasting change through encouraging people, rewarding people, and through showing kindness, and how that perhaps wasn't completely understood by lots of people in leadership. We then had a discussion around othering, which was where we sort of went off. So we talked a bit about how older people being othered, younger people being othered, and kind of how that felt. This is kind of an extra layer to the research on divisiveness, and we talked a bit about personal experiences there. I think there are probably other things, but I don't know if other people might want from room 1 might want to come in on those.
I'm just going to say I'm going to try and keep some basic notes of what everybody's kind of saying, and then we can I'll when we do the follow-up email, I'll share that as a kind of reference of what we've all thought about, and like if there's things that we're coming up with, what might we actually do. I'll try and keep that as a potential actions for people to take away and think about. But the transactional relationships, kind of, there is a negativity towards feeling like I've experienced kindness and now I'm expected to give something back, and it's a new ground. You're right, we're moving into a new kind of social arena that we haven't had before. So kindness sounds like a really nice idea from the start, but there is that awkwardness around it just because it's a new social interaction, I guess.
Ben?
Yeah, sorry, thanks Kat. I just wanted to, I think that's really interesting, your sort of reflections on I suppose like how people receive kindness, and maybe the sort of whether it's a mutual thing or whether it's something that somebody does to another person. I think that's something we thought quite a lot about, that kindness should be a reciprocal thing, and you can't I can't tell you that I'm being kind to you. It depends on how you feel. And I think when at a time when there's a lot of kind of mutual aid going on, there's a lot of talk around vulnerability. We can't just be thinking about, oh, I need to do kindness to this other person. It's a contract between two people, and it's a reciprocal relationship, and it's makes it quite a difficult thing to navigate, because what's kind to one person might not be kind to another person, and it's sort of based on our kind of human interactions with each other. So, but yeah, sounds like you had a really interesting discussion.
Let's move on to the next group. Because due to a slight technical glitch, we went straight from room 1 to room 3. So the next group was Angarad, Claire, Derek, Emily, Esha, and Raj. So give us a wee wave if you're in that group and you fancy telling us a little bit. Angarad, go for it. I hope I'm saying your name properly.
Angarad, yeah, you are. Hi, everyone. We had really interesting conversation based around all the volunteering opportunities in communities and the relationships that have been developed throughout this past 6 months in the community. I work for an arts organisation in Pontypridd, and adapting the way of our working and the connections we've made just in general with the participants, on a personal level, of people sharing their stories and and connecting with each other through the arts, and how important that has been an invaluable way in order to be able to express what we've been going through, and having that kindness in action through volunteering and creating these sustained relationships will hopefully then kind of continue to go on to the future, because here, and I think in a number of the other places that people are talking about in the group, you know, we've had locally, we've had about 1,500 volunteers, there's been 2,000 volunteers, you know, so people want to help and be kind and connect with one another, really. And I think, Raj, you were saying about the forums that you've created during the time of you've been self-isolating, and the invaluable work you've been doing there through forums and giving a platform for carers to come and voice their concerns and have spaces where people can come together and have those times in order to be able to just be with one another, I think, and share during this, you know, uncomfortable time where, you know, it is difficult, and it is uncomfortable even being in a space sometimes on Zoom and expressing the way that you truly feel, or, you know, so it takes time to develop those trusting relationships. I'll give an example of, I go up to Graigwen Woods, which is a local woods, and I just do this walk every day, and at the beginning I'd bump into people and they'd be hiding in the bushes, or, you know, so it was quite a strange time that nobody wanted to really, and I'm that kind of person that I smile at everyone anyway and connect with people through eye contact. But eventually, by seeing the same people every day, eventually people would start opening up. So I didn't impose that upon them. But now it's like, oh, we'll have to go for a cup of tea after all that, you know, and a piece of cake. And, you know, so we've set up some future relationships, which have been really lovely. So yeah, those little acts of kindness are so important, really, for all of us. I think I probably haven't covered everything, but I don't know if anyone else from the group has got anything else they want to add to that.
I quite like the idea of creating, like, if somebody's self-isolating and they maybe can't get out, but creating an online community, but also those kind of safe spaces where you're acknowledging it's not all easy and it takes time to feel like you can be trusting and say those things, but obviously there's a real need if people are feeling isolated with caring responsibilities and things like that. So
yeah, and understanding people's individual needs as well. We've got a group, a Crafty Cuppa group that we run with older people, and there's one participant who's 98 years old and he's not been able to access Zoom at all. So we've been doing doorstop visits and just, you know, passing on a bit of veg that he's had, you know, to one of his friends, or just for him to feel that connectedness with his friend, you know. Yeah, and just little things like that really is so important and just picking up the phone, you know, before all this. I don't know about all of you, but, you know, we've got so much access to internet that we don't call each other enough anymore, or just sit there and have a little chat, you know, or take the time. And having that time away from the busyness of the world, it really makes you kind of, I don't know, reflect and just be able to open up a little bit more to the people around us, really, and take that time, have time for each other rather than rush on to the next thing and the next thing. So yeah, there's been about, what I've loved about this, some of the participants who are part of writers groups in Pontypridd, they've really helped me in my health and well-being, because we've connected through family and friends, you know, found out that we've got family in the same place because our family isn't local, so we haven't got local, you know, I'm single and I live in a shared house, so it's kind of like, it's been really nice to connect in those ways and just know that when we come out of this, we've got, you know, a new connection and someone that we can just connect with and get together with.
I think your point about things taking time as well. I've been on calls where people have said, I've tried to go to my neighbours and kind of received a, oh, I'm not really interested, kind of, and then that puts people on a back foot, or they feel, you know, there's an awkwardness of building up the courage to go and knock on your neighbour's door, and if that's what you kind of receive, but it's like that's somebody's personal choice, and that's not a reflection on you trying, and of course respect that if that's what somebody says to you, but then maybe it will take time, they'll come around, maybe they won't, and that's just not for them, and that's okay too, but don't feel too disheartened. People always have their choices and what they feel as a preference or what's worked for them as well. So I think your point about things taking time is quite nice as well. What's our next group? Is it group 4 that we've got?
Yes, group 4. Lisa, could you tell us who's in group 4?
Yep, so it's Catherine and Lan.
Do you want to give a wave if that's you?
Tell us what you were chatting about.
I think Lan's on camera. Do you want to talk, Lan?
I guess we're talking about the examples of kindness we've seen in our own communities, or in the places, or in where those of us that are working professionally, engaging with communities. And I guess there was a lot of talk about how do we sustain this, and just talking about how although we've seen a lot of positive activity at the local level, we're kind of also constrained by structural forces at the national level, at politics, at the level of funding, of, you know, how, although kindness is important, worried about the fact there's less funding going around, you have to prove yourself more, and how do we show people the value of kindness? How do we make that part of the outcomes or evaluation discourse, that it's something that is really important and a building block of health and well-being, without which we won't have very much else. I don't know if that was a good enough summary of what we talked about.
Catherine, anything you want to add?
I think also, just to briefly touch on the fact, we're becoming more aware that the traditional nuclear families and ways of life aren't as common. And we were talking about the perception of rule breaking, especially with this whole snitch on your neighbours sort of campaign that seems to be going on at the moment, that not everybody lives the same type of life. There are exemptions to the rules, which you only know about if your situation applies to the exemptions. So other people may not be aware that if you've been in a social bubble of more than 6 before the rule of 6 came in, for example, if you've got 7 people in your house, you may not actually be breaking those rules, but yet an outsider's perception is, oh, they've got 7 in the house. And the differences between local areas as well, different nations in particular, you know, children under 11 don't count in the body counts, if we want to call it that, within the rule of 6 in certain areas, they do in others. And then you've got that whole thing of, you know, parents, grandparents, you've got parents, their partners, all sorts of dynamics that make a family, and the impact that has on life, and showing kindness as well, because children learn through us, and children learn by what they see, and there's quite a bit of judgment in various ways about, oh, if children are seen out in groups, is it family, is it friends? Are you going to walk up to someone in the street and ask if they're all related and if they are all from the same household? There's a lot of behaviour management, I think, and the whole balance of technology versus non-technology in that as well, that not everyone can access the technology, and it's great that the technology is there, for the circumstances we're finding ourselves in, but we're going to have to be careful once COVID's finally not a huge force in our life anymore, that we don't just continue on this trajectory of technology is superior and, you know, you don't have to be in the same room anymore, you don't have to be in the same county or country even. I think there is a balance to play in that, and I understand we've got to adapt to circumstances, but once the circumstances change again, there is a balance to be had, I think.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Lan. Lots of really good points there, and I think lots of agreement with you in the chat. I'm very interested in your point, Catherine, of how we kind of react to others around us who we perceive as breaking the rules. I think links back so much to what Ben was saying earlier, actually. People feel very strongly and very negatively often about people they perceive to be breaking the rules. And how do we move out of that space? How do we encourage people to consider that actually there might be things they don't know, there might be very good reasons why that person is doing that, why they're not wearing a mask, why they are making that journey. And that's almost about kind of how can we use kindness basically to not do something, almost to kind of not say step up to that group and confront them, for example. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that, Ben.
Sorry, searching for the mute button there. Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right, and it's sort of about that. Yeah, at its core, it's about understanding, isn't it? And yeah, going back to the sort of very root of kindness, it's treating each other like kin. And so, how would you want to be treated if you were in that situation? And I think that's important to bear in mind with all of these things. But I think, yeah, it does feel like there's all of these opportunities to be judging people around us that makes it quite difficult at the moment.
Ben, do you want to answer? I just throw it in. John Chapman's asked the question in chat, and he's saying, I'm sensing a feeling that kindness needs to be channeled and organised to be sustained. And we've kind of talked about sustaining through what is now an extending time of a pandemic or crisis or whatever we want to call it. But that need to sustain this, doesn't this take away from the core human instinct of being kind to each other? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Lots of thoughts. Thanks.
From your work more than just, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we've had which I didn't touch on today, but we've a lot of our work recently has been thinking about how you build kindness into policy and decision making, and what it would be for an organization to be kind, thinking of sort of like public service delivery setting as well. And yeah, I think there's a sense there that if you try to operationalize kindness, it can take away, detract from the very thing that you're trying to create. I think one example that isn't mine, but I think it is worth sharing now, is the cup of cocoa round. I don't know if anybody's heard of it before, but essentially it was in a hospital setting, and a nurse was sort of going off their shift and had sort of changed out their scrubs already, were on their way home, and they passed someone and said, all right, I'll see you tomorrow. Is there anything you need right now? And the person in the hospital bed had said, oh yeah, I'd really love a cup of cocoa. So she'd gone, made the cup of cocoa, taken it to this patient, and they'd had, really, I think the patient had then told somebody, and it had gone through the feedback chains, and everyone had been like, wow, that was great, that was kindness. Let's do a cup of cocoa round every single night at 6 o'clock, which is obviously not the thing at all. The thing was the fact that person cared enough about the individual to respond, and in that moment made what was probably a very, low quality cup of hot chocolate, given that it's in a hospital. It's not the actual thing. So it's kind of how can you create environments where people feel like they have the freedom and the flexibility to do things like that, but not prescribe, oh, you have to make a cup of cocoa or you have to do certain actions. So it's trying to create an environment where things are possible rather than prescribing particular activities. And I think that's very difficult. Yeah, go on, John.
Yeah, I was in the group, the breakout group. I was thinking about my experience living in a small, fairly affluent area, if you like. But one word, not untypically of such areas, nobody really knows their neighbours, and everybody gets on with their lives. And two things happened. First of all, there was lockdown. And then there was the Thursday night clapping for the NHS. And that two things had changed. One was we all had in common that we were into this strange, mysterious thing for which the only parallels anyone could think of was looking back to the Second World War. And the other was that we were out seeing each other down the street and within shouting distance. And then a third thing happened, which was that somebody set up a WhatsApp group around the area. And that was the only real sort of institutionalizing or organizing or channeling. It provided a vehicle. Out of that emerged a discovery that all of us are really quite kind people. And kindness began to happen amongst people who really were on no more than nodding acquaintance before, and many of whom perhaps new arrivals, not even that. Enabled by the WhatsApp group initially, encouraged a little bit by, but so the thing that created that essentially, I think, was lockdown. So we could say that the government has just done the most necessary thing to further kindness as a thing rediscovered amongst people by saying it's going to be like this for another 6 months, so that we still have this shared situation out of which, or within which, what is a natural human instinct is nurtured.
Thank you, John. I think that's really insightful. Can I go to Sue?
Yeah, I just, it's just bringing together what's coming with the government and this situation. And I've just remembered a time I met this, I was at some party or something and was talking to this guy from Malawi. And I mentioned something about community development. And he was asking me about it. And it was so funny because he said, so you have these sort of organizations with paid people who are paid to develop your community. And he just couldn't stop laughing. It was really funny. And I've always remembered that because we're not in a culture here and in many Western places where something like just looking after your tribe is there as an automatic thing that you look out for each other. So I personally think that we can actually make a decision as individuals to be kind, because if it's modelled, and it goes back, Ben, right at the beginning, I was really struck by what you said, that it's so amazing to hear that kind of language from an elected leader. And it was like, well, that's extraordinary that we have to be amazed at that kind of language. I mean, my expectations of leadership, you know, at whatever level, is that they are compassionate and kind. And it's very interesting how this really sort of sticks out with the leaders we see and hear from, who come from heart, you know. So that's all I meant to say. So I think we have to model kindness. We model other things. Why can't we model kindness? You know, just do it. Just decide. It's just a decision to do it and try it. And it might be tough sometimes and you might get rebuffed. But I would prefer to be like that. I prefer our world to be like that or have that way of thinking. So, yeah. Okay. Shut up now.
Thank you, Sue. And that's a really lovely thing to hear. And I'm hearing kind of lots of themes kind of coming out of this about the things that people want to do to try and kind of keep this alive, you know, whether that's actually creating those opportunities to kind of connect in the way that, you know, John said, actually, that's what lockdown did, was it was an opportunity and almost a necessity to connect with the people around us where we had something in common, creating those kinds of opportunities, or being aware that actually we want to kind of go out and put kindness out into the world, I think is quite a nice way of looking at it as well. And one of the big themes that's coming through again in the chat group is about time. Again, we're all connected to everything, notifications are going off all the time, and being present and having the time to actually be present and connect with someone is also, I think, both a necessity for kindness and an act of kindness in itself. But I'm aware that actually we've got two groups. I think John was group 5 and Sue was in group 6. Is there anyone else from group 5 who wants to add anything that came out of their group? Anyone in John's group? Give us a wee wave. Or John, is there anything else you want to add? No? Lovely. Sue? Or anyone in Sue's group? No? Anyone in group 6, or anyone want to add anything that came up in their groups that they've not said yet? No, it's just like, okay, everyone's, oh, Raj, yes.
I think we've sort of touched on it, but I think we talked about, I mean, caring, compassion, modelling, absolutely agree with everything that's been said. And I think a big part in the conversation in our group was also about the volunteering that's come out. Is it's also been for the volunteers, it's about the impact on people volunteering and their well-being as much. I mean, that's something that's come out a lot, because people who've volunteered and have shown kindness, not just received kindness, have it's been really good for their self-worth as well, and it's shown people who might otherwise be seen as disabled or unable to join in society normally, they've been able to contribute as well. So I think it's opened up new opportunities for people who would normally not necessarily be seen as being able to contribute to society, and I think that's been really good for some mental health and well-being as well.
Yeah.
That in itself, I think, is a huge sort of area that's a surprising positive for individuals, but also our communities. Yeah, there's lots to talk about volunteer mental health as well, and we found that working, for example, my volunteers worked door-to-door frontline as well with emergency responses for vulnerable and isolated, but also set up the volunteer groups on Facebook. So a variety of ways of connecting to reduce isolation and vulnerability seems to have shown that people have been brought together in different ways. And not everybody wanted or was able to do it through tech. So old school door-to-door was just as important, and being around your own local neighbourhood. I think somebody said earlier, you know, if you could, because we've been at home, mostly because of lockdown, we've had to sort of go out, get to know where we live more than we normally would do, and we're normally rushing around. And it's built those local connections for everybody. The more personable, not the online and not the sort of hello, how are you, but deeper relationships. And I think that's where we can sustain it further, because those connections can now be evolved and adapted, because we've shown that we're extremely adaptable. And I think moving forward for sustainability, I think we were talking about these connections we can build upon, we can adapt to anything and support. It doesn't have to be about COVID moving forward. The sustainability is about the connection, so that we know we're there for each other, whatever happens, whether it's floods or you know, needing a bit of food from next door because you've not been to the shop or whatever. It's getting to know each other, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. Thank you. And I think that's a thing that actually just keeping those relationships alive, starting to develop them, will be what helps the kindness that we've kind of started to help it endure, basically. I'm going to pass over to Ben to just for any kind of final reflections, basically, and then we'll start to wrap up the session. But please don't run away just yet, because there are a couple of things I want to say to you before you go. Ben?
Thanks, Sophie, and thanks everyone. It's been really, really good to listen to your reflections on all of the various conversations, and wish I'd been able to be a part of all of them, really. I think, yeah, one of the things that's interesting to me, and you sort of touched on it there, Raj, and I think John had mentioned the weather in the sort of chat earlier. It's like it seems to always take an emergency for these things to happen. It's you know, the floods, or it's a pandemic, or you know, there's a lot of literature about what happened in like New Orleans as well, in that you know, that sort of like disaster, and like it takes that to kind of unlock this like latent connection and kindness. So I think it's really interesting to think about what, as we kind of, you know, go through this process, what are the things that we sort of notice creeping back in that get in the way of what we've valued most over the last few months. And you know, if it's time, and we suddenly notice that we are kind of, you know, going back to our busyness, and we don't have time for our neighbors, or for, you know, whatever it is that we've been doing, can we do things to create that time and space? Can we, you know, talk to our employers about that? If it's a big sort of theme in our work has been looking at the kind of, there are actually some quite hard barriers that get in the way sometimes. You know, things like PVG regulation and health and safety that sometimes inhibit all of the kind of like positive volunteering that we've been talking about right now, and to kind of notice where these things are coming back in, and to try and challenge them, and yeah, I suppose just sort of like remember what we have valued. And I think sort of telling that story and sharing those examples will be the thing that allows us to sustain it. So I think that's all from me for now. But yeah, just I think that, you know, Sophie and the team will share some links after this, and I'd be more than happy to follow up with any of you if you want to have a further conversation about it. So, and thanks for joining today.